A glass shattered before I could answer, and Ethan said, "You weren't supposed to see this." My name caught in my throat like smoke. The loft smelled of rain and spilled whiskey. Lily's text glowed on his phone, an echo of trust turned siren. I said, "Tell me it's a joke," and the thunder outside laughed for him. He reached for the device, but the screen burned a thread of messages that rewrote our history. Jonah knocked once and paused, sensing danger through wood. Ethan said, "You owe me everything," and the word everything sliced me open. We had built our futures in this room, brick by careful brick. Now the bricks were falling, and he watched them drop like coins. I whispered, "How could you take what I can't replace?" And the storm pressed its ear to the window. Somewhere between us, the promise we made at 16 cracked, and the sound was a scream I recognized as my own. Morning belonged to us before the world learned our names. Ethan said, "We can promise it again," and I laughed because the sun on the basketball court made even cracked asphalt shine. We traded secrets like lucky coins and swore never to spend them. I said, "No matter where we end up, we keep calling home here." He pointed at the chipped hoop and called it our cathedral. Our sneakers squeaked to him, and the net whispered approval. We chased the ball into shadows and back into light. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and summer orange drinks. Ethan said, "If I mess up, you tell me first," and I nodded because honesty felt unbreakable. The city hummed around us, and trust felt like air, invisible and everywhere. We grew up inside late-night kitchens where quiet had its own language. Ethan said, "Your mom trusts me more than mine does," and I poured tea until steam wrote halos above chipped mugs. We mapped our futures on napkins, arrows looping into braver versions of us. I said, "We'll build something that keeps the lights on for everyone." He smiled like the idea could shelter storms. The fridge buzzed steady, a small engine pushing us forward. We counted the ways we would not fail each other. We practiced honesty like scales on a piano, clumsy at first, then true. Ethan said, "If we win together," and I believed it the way I believed in gravity. The first crack arrived dressed as a favor. Ethan said, "Let me pitch your deck." They listened to me, and the room shrugged like it had seen this before. I handed him the file because I thought trust was a force field. He texted updates that read like fortune cookies, vague and sweet. I said, "How did they respond?" And he replied with fireworks and no smoke. The silence between messages lengthened until it felt like a hallway with no doors. I practiced faith the way swimmers practice breath, counting and hoping. The night narrowed around my screen, and the glow started to feel like frost. Ethan said, "Almost there," but the map he sent led nowhere. Jonah noticed before I did, and his silence weighed more than advice. He said, "You two move like planets, but gravity changes," and I laughed to keep fear quiet. He watched Ethan float from room to room with a smile that did not reach the corners. I said, "He's under pressure," and Jonah pressed his lips into a thin line. We stood outside the venue where our next chance waited, and wind peeled posters from brick. Jonah said, "If the floor shifts, do you still stand there?" And I said yes, because love makes brave arguments. A gull cut the sky and left it whole. The door opened, and I stepped through before the truth could stop me. The first call I missed felt like nothing, but the third sat heavy in my chest. Ethan said, "You know I've been swamped," and his laugh cracked like ice under a skater's blade. The clock read past midnight, and silence rang louder than his excuses. I said, "You promised to update me," but the words slid into static. My phone vibrated again and stopped, leaving ghosts of his voice in the air. Once we counted hours together, now minutes became oceans. I traced his name on the screen and wondered when it stopped meaning safety. Ethan texted fireworks, but never showed the sky. I asked, "Where are you really?" and the typing dots vanished before truth arrived. Shadows lengthened in my room, and I realized distance was not about miles but choices. By morning, his excuses wore new costumes. Ethan said, "Deadlines, meetings, you know how it goes." but the pauses between words felt heavier than the words themselves. I poured coffee that cooled untouched, staring at a blank chair across from me. Once filled with laughter, it now gathered dust. I said, "We built this together," but my voice only echoed in ceramic. The cup trembled when I lifted it, though my hands swore they were steady. He sent another vague update, emojis strung like beads with no prayer. I thought of all the times he had shown up unasked, ready with fire for my storms. Now I met shadows where his light should have been, and the silence turned into a stranger sitting in his place. The first time Lily joined us, she laughed too easily, and Ethan's smile lingered too long. She said, "You two are unstoppable together," and her eyes flicked at him like sparks testing dry leaves. I wanted to believe the compliment, but something sharp hid behind her softness. Ethan leaned closer when she spoke, forgetting the distance he had put between us. I said we should get back to work, but my voice sounded like a cracked record. Lily's bracelets jingled like tiny alarms I could not switch off. She leaned on her elbows, comfortable as if she had always belonged. Ethan's laugh was different with her, shaped like secrets I wasn't invited to hear. Later, I overheard Ethan say, "She doesn't need to know everything," and the words cut sharper than a blade. He spoke low but not low enough, and I caught the crack in his loyalty. My chest burned, yet my face stayed still, as if painted in calm. I said nothing, holding silence like a shield, though every heartbeat begged me to strike. Lily laughed lightly, unaware while pretending not to notice the fracture widening. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso, bitter and unkind. My reflection in the window stared back, asking who I was without trust. Ethan's voice carried again, smoother this time, like oil hiding flame. I gripped my notebook tighter, every word they shared carving out the walls we had built together. Jonah's silence felt like thunder waiting its cue. He stood beside me after they left, his gaze fixed on the door. He said, "You felt it too," and I nodded, though my throat ached. The night air pressed heavy on us, street lamps buzzing like restless insects. I said, "It's just work stress," but the words tasted false, brittle as glass. Jonah looked at me with eyes that saw further than mine, and his sigh carried warnings I tried not to hear. He said, "Be ready," and walked away before I could argue. The city roared around me, cars slicing through puddles, strangers laughing, but none of it softened the echo inside. My chest held the shape of absence, and I realized fear had already moved in. Ethan arrived glowing with charm, and the room leaned toward him like flowers to heat. He said, "I've got good news," and the words sparkled without weight. I smiled because that was our ritual. He laid out updates like polished stones, smooth, bright, identical. I said, "Who did you meet?" And he answered with names that blurred at the edges. He praised the team and forgot to include me. The laugh he offered felt rented, not earned. He said, "Trust the process," and my ribs counted the cost. Lily texted a joke that made his eyes light, in a way mine used to. I said, "Send me the draft," and he promised before checking the time. The clock on the wall ticked like a wick. His phone faced down on the table, which told me everything he would not. Jealousy did not arrive loud. It whispered through ordinary moments. He said, "They loved the pitch, but skipped the part where mine began it." I laughed carefully so the floor would not crack. Lily entered with a breeze of perfume and second chances. She said, "Let's celebrate," and set down pastries like trophies. Ethan's eyes followed the sugar. Then her. Then everything except me. I said, "We still have revisions," and the air cooled around the word, "still." He waved away the worry, a king dismissing weather. She touched his sleeve as if it required comfort. The window showed a city that never blinked. I tightened the knot of my focus and watched his attention drift like a kite. We met at the cafe to align the story, and I arrived early with questions sharpened. Ethan said, "Lily has a note about your hook," and my heart corrected the pronoun. Lily said, "Just a tiny tweak," and drew loops on a napkin that circled my work. I nodded, because the floor demanded grace. He praised her insight with a grin I recognized from victories we once shared alone. I said, "Let's test both versions," and the table cooled under my palms. She leaned in, bracelets chiming, voice honeyed and professional. The barista called a name that was not mine. Ethan looked past me to catch her smile, then returned too late. The draft on my screen felt like a room where I suddenly needed permission to stand. The confrontation almost happened in the elevator where truths echo. Ethan said, "You're reading into things," and the cables hummed a thin warning. I pressed the button for a floor I did not need. He adjusted his collar as if the mirror had asked him to. I said, "You forgot to credit me," and the light above us flickered. He answered, "It's all of us," which meant no one, which meant not me. The doors opened to a corridor of glass and polite smiles. I stepped out because anger loves witnesses, and I did not. He stayed inside, phone in hand, wearing the kind of smile that forgives itself. The doors slid shut like weather. My reflection in the glass looked brave and very tired. Jonah found me by the stairwell where quiet keeps its promises. He said, "Tell me what you need to hear," and the gentleness made a crack in my guard. I exhaled a truth I had been rationing. I said, "I need to know I'm not imagining this," and the stairwell caught the words and returned them softer. He watched the empty hallway and chose his next breath like a careful step. He said, "Patterns don't lie, people do," and the sentence landed like a lantern. I smiled because I was done apologizing for seeing. Somewhere above, laughter broke and scattered. I tightened my grip on the railing and let resolve climb first. The building shifted from fortress to map. The truth revealed itself not with thunder, but with quiet cruelty. Lily said, "He told me it was his idea," and the ground tilted under my shoes. Her eyes carried pity, but pity burned hotter than lies. I said, "Every slide was mine," and the room hushed like it understood. Ethan walked in, smile wide as if applause had followed him. He said, "We won it," but his eyes dared me to protest. My chest cracked open, but words stayed behind my teeth. The applause I once dreamed of now stabbed. He lifted the trophy, and I saw my name missing from every headline. Lily's silence stretched, fragile and sharp. I said, "You took it all," and he did not deny it. The betrayal was not whispered anymore. It was printed in bold. My voice broke like glass under boots. I said, "You didn't just steal my work, you stole me." Ethan's grin faltered, but only for a second. He said, "I made it better," and the words coiled like smoke in my lungs. Lily shifted, bracelets clinking a nervous rhythm. The silence in the room grew teeth. I wanted to scream, but rage makes you colder than ice. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine as though we were still allies. I pulled away, my skin burning with the weight of betrayal. The audience clapped politely, unaware they were clapping for theft. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "Without me, you're invisible," and the whisper cut deeper than any shout. Later, Lily stood with me under streetlight rain. She said, "I didn't know he'd take credit," but her eyes confessed otherwise. I said, "You let him," and her silence signed the truth. The drizzle traced our shoulders, but I felt only fire. She reached out, then pulled back, her bracelet silent now. Ethan's laughter echoed from across the street, careless, victorious. I asked, "Was it worth it?" And Lily's lips parted, but gave no answer. The water carried the city's dirt into drains, and I wished my trust could follow. She said, "I never meant to hurt you, but intentions weighed nothing against scars." I turned away, leaving her framed in silver rain and regret. Ethan wore guilt like a costume, slipping it on only when someone watched. He said, "I carried us further than you could," and the words dripped arrogance dressed as reason. His eyes flickered, searching for cracks in my armor. I said, "You carried yourself," and his smirk curled sharper. The office lights buzzed overhead, sterile and cruel. His hand rested on the trophy like it belonged to his bones. I could almost hear every memory splinter under its weight. He said, "You'll thank me one day," and I almost laughed, because gratitude does not grow in ashes. Silence pressed between us, heavy as stone, and for the first time he looked smaller than the lies he built. The past walked into the present wearing familiar shoes. Jonah stood at the door, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came Claire, the ghost of Ethan's past, eyes dark with truth. She said, "He's done this before," and silence cracked open like thunder. Ethan's face drained of color, his mask slipping faster than he could catch it. I said, "Tell me everything," and Claire's voice uncoiled the history he buried. Jonah watched with grim satisfaction, his silence breaking like glass at last. The walls of his empire began to sweat under truth. Ethan said nothing, because lies choke when history walks in. For the first time, I did not feel alone. The shadow he cast was not infinite anymore. It was shrinking. The storm inside finally escaped its cage. I said, "You stole my life's work," and the room shook with every syllable. Ethan's smirk vanished, replaced with rage. He said, "I made it worth something," and his voice cracked like lightning splitting sky. Jonah stood between us, arms tense, his silence now heavy with warning. Lily shifted uneasily, her bracelets clinking like chains. My chest heaved with years of swallowed trust, now spilling sharp and unrepentant. I said, "You built nothing, only borrowed what I bled for." Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes refusing to blink. He said, "Without me, you'd still be nobody," and the venom laced every word. The air itself seemed to bow beneath the weight of broken loyalty, as if it too could no longer hold. The confrontation turned volcanic. I said, "Every victory we dreamed was supposed to be ours," and my voice shook walls. Ethan slammed his palm against the table, rattling glasses. He said, "Dreams belong to the one who seizes them," spitting the words like sparks. Lily gasped, stepping back, guilt shadowing her face. Jonah's voice cut through the storm. "Enough." His single word thundered louder than our shouts. I looked at Ethan, the boy I once trusted with secrets, now a man dressed in betrayal. I said, "I don't know who you are anymore," and the truth tasted like ashes. He sneered, "I'm the one who finally stopped waiting." Jonah finally broke his silence fully. He said, "I've watched you tear her down piece by piece," and his voice carved through Ethan's facade. Ethan snapped, "Stay out of this," but his anger only revealed weakness. I said, "He sees the truth you bury," and my strength grew from every syllable. Lily whispered, "He's not who I thought," and the words punctured the room like a blade. Ethan's eyes flared, turning to her, betrayal etched into betrayal. Jonah stepped closer, his presence anchoring me when I thought I'd drown. He said, "You've mistaken cruelty for power," and the silence afterward felt holy. Ethan's lips trembled, but no words came. The collapse came like thunder, splitting open sky. I shouted, "You were my brother," and tears mixed with fury. Ethan's voice cracked, "You were my cage." The words froze me, sharper than steel. Silence wrapped around us like smoke. Lily cried softly, her face buried in her hands. Jonah's eyes glistened, but his stance never broke. I said, "I would have given you everything, but you wanted the one thing you could never earn, trust." The word echoed, and Ethan's body stiffened like stone. He said nothing, only stared, as if silence might stitch his pride together. The room groaned with finality, as though even walls mourned what we destroyed. The choice fell heavy, and Lily stood trembling. She said, "I can't follow you," her words aimed at Ethan but cutting me too. His face hardened into stone, betrayal boomeranging back to him. I said, "You've lost more than my trust tonight," and the truth burned hot. Jonah's hand rested on my shoulder, steadying me as the ruins settled. Ethan's silence roared, his eyes hollow with disbelief. Lily stepped toward me, then stopped, guilt tethering her in place. I turned away, because some doors must close forever. The night swallowed our shadows, leaving only echoes of what we once were. The bond was gone, replaced by ashes, and even victory could not rebuild it. The city felt too large when I walked home alone. I said it should have ended differently, though no one listened but the wind. Street lamps stretched my shadow until it looked like someone else. The silence after rage is worse than rage itself, cold and endless. My chest echoed with emptiness, each step dragging broken promises behind me. Ethan's face replayed in shards, sharp enough to cut even in memory. Jonah's words about patterns returned like thunder rolling late. I whispered, was I blind or just too faithful? And the question carried no answer. The night swallowed me whole, but I kept walking, because stopping meant drowning in the pieces he left. Ethan sat in his apartment, surrounded by trophies that looked emptier than silence. He said, "This is what I wanted," but the echo refused to agree. The glass of whiskey in his hand trembled, not from cold, but from regret he would not name. Shadows stretched long across bare walls, turning his victory into a cage. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the weight crushing him, because ambition never sleeps beside peace. He said, "I won," though no one was left to hear. The phone lit with unread messages, but none carried warmth. His empire felt hollow, and he knew it, though he'd never say it out loud. Jonah's voice reached me like an anchor in dark water. He said, "You survived what was meant to bury you," and I exhaled for the first time in hours. His tone carried no pity, only truth sharp enough to steady me. We sat on cold steps outside the theater, the world moving past without noticing our stillness. I said, "I don't know what comes next," and my honesty felt like fire in my throat. He answered, "You don't need to yet," and the words gave me space to breathe. The street buzzed with strangers' laughter, but between us was silence that felt like shelter. Lily's reflection lingered in my mind as much as her words. She said, "I didn't mean for this, but intentions couldn't patch wounds." I replayed her hesitation, her half-step toward me, the guilt etched deeper than apologies. I said, "You chose silence," though she wasn't there to hear me anymore. Sometimes betrayal wears a crown, sometimes it wears bracelets. The truth was she had been both witness and accomplice. Her regret tasted thin, like watered wine. The part of me that wanted to forgive had already burned away. All that remained was clarity sharper than fire. Claire returned with her truths like a storm breaking chains. She said, "He's been this way for years," and her eyes carried scars not mine. The weight of history poured across the table we shared, old betrayals stacking onto new now. I said, "So I was never special, just another target," and the words chilled me. She answered, "No, you were the one he feared most," and the sentence rewrote everything. Jonah listened, nodding, his silence a witness again. Claire's presence reminded me betrayal wasn't personal. It was his nature. I no longer carried blame, I carried warning. The past had joined me, not to haunt, but to remind me I was free. The city woke with a quiet resilience, and I walked its streets lighter than before. I said, "I'm not broken, only reshaped," and the words felt true. The sky stretched wide, no storm left to drown me. Ethan's shadow no longer followed, only mine did, and it fit. Jonah's voice echoed in memory, reminding me I was stronger than the pieces left behind. I smiled faintly, not for victory, but for survival. The ache remained, but it pulsed like proof that I was still alive, still moving forward. Ethan sat alone, the silence in his apartment louder than applause. He said, "It was supposed to feel different," staring at trophies that reflected nothing back. The whiskey glass was empty, but the void inside was endless. Success without loyalty turned hollow, and he finally tasted it. The empire he craved weighed heavier than the chains he escaped. For the first time, his hands shook without knowing how to steady them. Lily lingered on the edge of choices. She said, "I never wanted this," but regret clung like perfume that would not fade. She watched me from across the street once, her eyes heavy with what-ifs. I turned away, because her silence had spoken louder than any apology. She chose him when truth demanded courage, and that choice built a wall taller than forgiveness. I walked on, leaving her framed in her own hesitation. Jonah spoke at last, with words that sealed the story. He said, "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away," and I felt the truth rest heavy and steady. We stood on the bridge, the river carrying reflections that refused to stay still. I said, "He no longer owns my story," and the words freed me. Jonah smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from scars, not victories. The night air wrapped around us like closure, not comfort. I said, "They didn't just betray me. They betrayed every version of us we could have been." And the words carved into silence like a scar no time could erase. The city roared on, indifferent, but I felt lighter, as if truth itself carried me forward. Ethan's name no longer felt like a wound, but a lesson written in fire. The past was ashes, and I walked into the dawn unafraid of burning again. The final cut had healed, leaving strength in its place.